Muy buenos días a todos. Me da muchísimo gusto saludarlos. Tengo el honor el día de hoy de conducir la entrevista de la presentación al profesor Paul Romer, quien nos va a honrar con una conferencia magistral sobre el futuro de la economía. Welcome, Professor Romer, to this conference. Thank you so much for being with us.
It's my pleasure.
El profesor Romer fue Premio Nobel de Economía en el 2018 por su trabajo en la teoría del crecimiento endógeno, execonomista en jefe del Banco Mundial. Es una autoridad en el mundo en el aprovechamiento de la tecnología y la innovación para impulsar el crecimiento a largo plazo. Es pionero de la teoría del crecimiento endógeno y el principal defensor de las ciudades autónomas. También es miembro senior del Instituto Marrón de Gestión Urbana, asesor de política económica COVID-19, ex economista en jefe y vicepresidente senior del Banco Mundial, catedrático de Economía y Derecho de la Universidad de Nueva York, NYU, y ha sido nombrado por la revista Time como uno de los 25 personas más influyentes de los Estados Unidos. El profesor Romer es un orador reconocido por la conexión entre regulación, innovación y crecimiento. Y en el clima actual de agitación económica, las organizaciones están encontrando un sentido de dirección y optimismo muy necesarios en los consejos prácticos e instructivos del profesor Romer. Paul Romer es un emprendedor político, asesora a líderes empresariales y gubernamentales de todo el mundo en diferentes sectores sobre formas de aprovechar la tecnología y la innovación para impulsar el crecimiento a largo plazo. Y tendremos la oportunidad de platicar esta mañana con el profesor Romer, a quien le damos la más cordial bienvenida a este encuentro digital Amafore 2021. Professor, welcome to our digital meeting to talk about the future of the economy, post-pandemic and beyond. Thank you for being with us.
Well, it's my pleasure to be here. This topic is, I think, the most important issue confronting every society, every nation on Earth. It's the choice between open or public forms of innovation and proprietary or private innovation. Success will require a mix of both, and it is innovation and discovery that generates growth and progress. But as we'll discuss today, getting the right mix is essential. That especially too much reliance on private innovation with not enough of the public innovation can lead to problems that we already see and that I think we need to correct. So let me tell a little bit of the story of my personal journey as an economist, starting back in the late 1970s. This was a time of great pessimism in the world. There was a sense that we were running out of scarce resources like oil. We were running out of land, and that we were facing the prospect of pervasive famine and food shortages. And my sense when I looked at history was that this pessimism was just entirely misplaced. Nothing about the historical record suggested that there was a logic or a basis for this pessimism. Now, economists had argued, along with many people who understood this intuitively, that because of scarcity, there were limits to growth. That as we had more and more people, we'd have less and less of something like land per person. And the sense was this must surely lead to decreases in the quality of life at some point. The issue that I brought into this discussion was that conclusion about scarcity came from a focus only on the economics of physical objects, which are scarce, but it neglected the economics of ideas, which are not scarce. And there are two senses in which ideas are not scarce. There are many, almost infinitely many ideas yet to be discovered. Moreover, when one person uses an idea, there's a kind of non-scarcity in the fact that another person can use the idea as well. That if it's a glass of liquid with a special medicine in it, one person can drink it, but not another. But if the idea is the formula for how to make that liquid that will have life-saving effects in terms of health, that formula can be used by everyone. So the economics of ideas are really profoundly optimistic, as I'll try and suggest. And the challenge for us is to take advantage of them by exploring ideas with the right mixture of public and private innovation. Jumping ahead, the way to think about innovation is that it creates new possibilities. And the thing to remember is those possibilities could be beneficial, but some things we discover could be harmful to society as a whole. It's also the case that some innovations will be profitable for someone to pursue in the market. Other innovations will not be profitable. And so the market-based incentives and firms may not pursue those kinds of innovations. Now, much of the analysis of growth and technology prior to my work assumed that all of the new possibilities came from public support for something like science. So that it was the government supporting researchers and universities and supporting scientific discoveries that produced new possibilities, because it wasn't profitable for firms to make those kinds of innovations. But what I pointed out is that an enormous amount of the real innovation that takes place in an economy comes from discoveries that firms make in the market. So as long as we created the right incentives for firms to innovate, we could rely on the power of the market to make new discoveries, not just on the power of the government or university professors to make discoveries. Now, because of this, I was optimistic, as I still am, about the potential for innovation, but I also became a little bit of a kind of a hero for firms in the private sector who were doing innovation, including the firms that emerged in, say, the 1990s based on the internet revolution. So let's fast forward from then till today. Here's a recent headline where now I've shifted from being perceived as the kind of the cheerleader for the tech sector into a pretty strong critic of the tech sector. And let me try and explain why, and why I'm calling for more government activism. One of the most important things that we have to remember is that new possibilities can be harmful as well as beneficial. And unfortunately, some types of private innovation will lead to harmful outcomes for society as a whole. So we need a role for the government, not just to do the support for public innovation in the upper left corner by supporting research and development and science and so forth, but we need a government which also stands ready to say to firms in the market sector, there's some things you cannot do because they will cause harm, and don't do that kind of innovation. Do the kind that actually produces benefits for society. And this is a very important role for government, but it takes a government which is strong enough to say no. And I think one of the challenges in the world today is that many governments may not be strong enough to stand up to pressure from firms who don't want to be told that you can't make a profit using something which is actually harmful to society. I'll come back and we'll talk about some examples that illustrate these types of innovation. So let's think about producing ideas more generally. A good example of public innovation is something that's referred to as oral rehydration therapy. It's a way to make a liquid in a glass, like I was describing before. It's a simple recipe for that liquid, which you can give to a child who's got a disease like cholera and save that child's life, because those children usually die of dehydration We just need to rehydrate them. But if you give them just water, they get sicker. So you need to mix a little bit of minerals and salt into that water, so it's got the right balance for what we take into our bodies. But it also turns out to help put a little bit of sugar in that water, because when the stomach is upset, you absorb the liquid more effectively if there's a little bit of sugar in it. This was a recipe that was discovered by people, was really pioneered by people in Bangladesh. But what they showed was that if children are sick with cholera and these other diseases that cause them to have lose a lot of liquid, they used to be treated by taking them to hospitals and giving them intravenous fluids through a line that went into their veins. Now all you had to do was mix up this liquid and give it to them, and anyone in their home could make the right kind of liquid and save a child's life. So this is a discovery, a recipe, an idea that has saved just millions and millions of lives since it was first uncovered in Bangladesh, tested there. It built on underlying science, but it was really people in the field who proved that this worked. And has now been shared and is used all over the world. Now, let's think about another type of innovation. When I was a child, I used to listen to music on my father's music system. He had an amplifier that was this big, heavy thing that had vacuum tubes in it. If any of you are old enough as I am to remember that, they would glow orange and they gave off heat. It used hundreds of watts of electricity to produce the signal for amplifying a record that we would play and listen to music. So fast forward to now. Now we have ways to listen to music that take hardly any electricity at all, that are portable, they can run on batteries, we carry them around in our pockets, and we can have music with us, high quality music with us anywhere we go. This is another way in which life is better. It's not just that more people are surviving childhood disease, but we can have the benefits of something like beautiful music that humans have created and have it when we want it, where we want it. This was a type of innovation that was led by the private sector and is unlikely to have come out of government efforts or the efforts of professors in universities. So this illustrates the potential for benefits from both types of innovation. Another kind of pattern is one where the government innovation comes first and then the market builds on it. So the government in the United States created a system called GPS, the Global Positioning System, where they placed a number of satellites in orbit around the Earth. Then the market could take the signals from those satellites and create all kinds of mobile applications like maps, where they could tell you, here's where you are right now, and given the GPS signal you're getting on your mobile device, and then we'll show you a map about where you can go. So sometimes the government does indeed, or government and universities and science do indeed create a foundation, a platform, which the market sector can then build on. Take another example, which is probably less well understood. One of the most important pieces of software and most complicated pieces of software in our world is the operating system. That's the system that all other software uses to connect with the underlying machine of a computer. Windows is the last new privately supported operating system that the world has seen. Since then, Apple has innovated with its operating system called Mac OS or OS X. But Mac OS X was built on an open source operating system called BSD. Google introduced a new operating system called Android, which they now use on things like mobile phones. But Android was based on another open source operating system known as Linux that's also used on servers. So there's an open source community that built these very complicated software systems with really hundreds or thousands of people who contributed effort to create something that, no group, even no firm could produce these days. But those open operating systems that could be copied and used by any firms were the foundation for innovation at both Apple and at Google. So the government needs to support not just the people in the universities, not just the medical researchers, but even this much broader open source community that contributes to open knowledge that everyone can share and everyone can use. To give you another kind of example, the chemistry of the science of chemistry that was developed in universities over centuries let firms produce chemical compounds like CFCs, chlorofluorocarbons, which were sold by for-profit firms and seem to have many beneficial properties. We use them as the refrigerant, the gas inside a refrigerator to make the refrigerator work. We could use them as kind of fire extinguishers in confined spaces like a submarine because they weren't toxic to humans if people were exposed to them. They really seemed like very beneficial chemicals. But then in the 1970s, scientists discovered that those CFCs were destroying the ozone layer, which is the outer layer of the atmosphere that protects the Earth from the harmful ultraviolet rays that would otherwise hit the surface of the Earth and expose us all to dangerous radiation. So the government in the United States, under the Reagan administration, made the decision to ban the sale and production of CFCs. The firms didn't like it. They said that, this would be a disaster. It would destroy the economy. There was all kinds of doom and gloom. But when the government said you cannot produce those anymore, the industry innovated and came up with other kinds of gases we could use to make refrigerators work. So that was a case where the government said no, and the market adjusted and shifted from a harmful type of innovation to a beneficial type. Moreover, in that episode, the United States took the lead in negotiating a treaty with all the countries of the world where they all agreed to ban the sale and production of CFCs because CFCs anywhere in the world could harm the ozone layer anywhere in the world. And so this was a case where not only were individual governments ready to act to stop something that was harmful, but they were ready to act together through treaties to do something that was good for all of mankind. Now, let me give another illustration. Wikipedia is an example of open production of knowledge, a little bit like open source. Many volunteers contribute to creating this website, whose goal is to have all of the knowledge that humans have accumulated available on the internet for free for anyone on Earth. It's really a mission that's devoted to encouraging the sharing of ideas and the benefits associated with the sharing of ideas that I mentioned before. I think Wikipedia is the most important product of the entire internet revolution. And I think it's a remarkable illustration of how people all over the world can contribute to produce something that benefits everyone. And the big question facing us now is what to do about some very important new types of innovation, in particular, artificial intelligence or machine learning. Is this something where we should rely on the proprietary market system to lead innovation so that Google or Facebook or Amazon or Apple control all of the insights and extract most of the benefits that this type of innovation could yield? Or should we instead force the knowledge and the discoveries and the benefits from artificial intelligence, force those out into the public sector where everybody can benefit from them, and everybody who's exploring, looking for new ideas can build on the old ones? As you can probably tell from my tone, I'm a big proponent of creating incentives in the market to force more of the innovation about artificial intelligence to take place on this open side, And if the firms say, well, if you do that, we won't do the innovation. You know, if you pass that regulation or you establish that kind of rule, we'll just stop innovating. But that's okay. We can innovate in universities. We can innovate through mechanisms like open source. We can innovate through mechanisms like Wikipedia. And I think this type of innovation available to everyone will be more equitable and will be more subject to public control and protect us from some harms that I think the private firms could expose us to if they have too much power over what we see, what we read, what we do. Now, let me go back and just kind of give you the usual catalog of the types of social harm that can come from innovation. One well-known familiar type is pollution. And the story of the CFCs and protecting the ozone layers, a story of successful government action to limit a very harmful type of pollution. Many countries have done a good job of limiting local pollution, the particulates, the soot, the smog in a local area. But of course, the big challenge that we haven't yet grappled with is limiting the pollution of carbon dioxide from burning fossil fuels. I'm certain that this will turn out to be like the case of the CFCs. Everybody is saying right now that progress will come to a halt, quality of life can't be sustained. We all have to go back to living in caves, if we give up fossil fuels. I think this will turn out to be just like CFCs. Once we say we can't get energy in that way, we've got to get it another way. The market will innovate, will come up with other solutions. We'll just shift, innovation will continue, but it will shift from a kind which right now is very harmful to a kind which is beneficial. And all that we're waiting on is for governments to take the kind of action that the US government took in the 1980s on the CFCs. Another type of social harm is financial innovation. Firms can come up with new ways to borrow and lend, new securities to sell, new financial arrangements to enter into. And these can produce, as we've seen, financial instability. You know, Mexico suffered very grievously from financial harms associated with innovation, a type of innovation in its financial sector was dominated by big banks. The United States suffered grievous harm and imposed grievous harm on all countries in the world with the financial crisis of 2007, 2008. And we imposed that harm on ourselves in the world because we didn't have a government that was ready to say no to financial firms. You cannot engage in that kind of financial innovation because it's going to expose everyone to the risk of a liquidity crisis, of a kind of a modern version of a bank run. And this can cause so much harm that we're going to put some limits on what you in the financial sector do. There's obvious threats to health and safety. The pandemic has demonstrated this very clearly to us, and governments need to be able to act to protect public health. Monopoly can be another problem. If a single firm ends up with too much control, it can stifle the potential for innovation by other firms, and it can even end up threatening the political system in a country if those monopolies become too strong. So we need to recognize that big is bad. Many lawyers have been saying for years, oh, big isn't bad if a firm is more efficient. Big is inherently bad, intrinsically bad, if a company becomes so big that its owners can threaten the entire political system and can threaten to move outside of the ability of the government to control what that firm does. So we need to have governments that can respond to these kinds of social harm. For pollution, there's traditional regulation and things like a carbon tax. Carbon tax could motivate innovation in the private sector, but without dictating what the solution is. I think that would be a very good kind of measure to adopt. It was the one recommended by my co-recipient of the Nobel Prize, Bill Nordhaus. In health and safety, we have many forms of traditional regulation. And in the wake of the pandemic, I think people are going to ask whether we need to enhance some of those capacities at the level of the government. In the financial market, I think we face some very serious risks right now with new cyber currencies. And I think it's worth thinking about new financial entities. It's possible that there's a benefit associated with a blockchain-based transaction system, but it might be better if that were something that were offered and controlled by a nonprofit, perhaps even a government, maybe by a coalition of people who are not motivated by profit, like the coalition that develops Wikipedia. I think the pursuit of cyber currencies purely for profit is exposing us to the risk of a really very dangerous financial bubble and another collapse, another round of a kind of a global financial panic that's like a global bank run and liquidity crisis. On monopoly, governments can do what they call merger review to put stronger limits on takeovers. When big existing firms take over the new entrants, they should put that kind of merger review in place. But I don't think it's realistic in today's world to think that governments are going to be able to break up some of the giants that have emerged. And so I think we need to think a little bit more carefully about what measures we could use to limit the power of those giants. Finally, I think the internet advertising turns out to be a very dangerous and potentially very harmful model of a business model, and especially when advertising is used to influence political campaigns. So I think at a minimum, governments should be thinking about starting to force companies that do online advertising, that do targeted advertising, that show different ads to different people. I think we should have governments that force those companies to disclose all of the ads that they're showing and to give us information about who's seeing what types of advertisements. Now, let me just elaborate a little bit on this advertising model, which is really driving the whole internet sector at the moment. Google started out offering a service. We'll search the internet for you. It was a very valuable service. But now Google search is missing all of the elements that are usually present in a market transaction. Typically, a buyer pays for a service. The seller provides the service. And then the buyer, if you don't like the service you're getting from Google, you've got a chance to go somewhere else. Well, right now, I don't pay anything to use Google search, but Google delivers a service that I don't like. It's littered with ads. They boost up links to proprietary paid opportunities that aren't the ones that I'm looking for. If I search for just the website for a hotel, I get dozens of things that aren't what I want. But I can't take my business anywhere else. I can't go to a better search alternative because Google is really the dominant player here. So and what this allows is the potential for a kind of a manipulation by a firm like Google that watches what someone like me searches for and then selects specific kinds of things to show me. And it creates the potential that Google can control what I read, what I see, what I hear, what I think, what I do. And this, I think, is a really very dangerous power for any privately controlled entity to have. Google is not alone. Facebook is the other huge participant in this market. Now, I think the measure that every jurisdiction should think about, and I think Mexico should think about it, I think every country in Latin America, is a proposal where they set a tax on the revenue that firms like Google and Facebook are collecting from companies in your country to show ads to your citizens. Every jurisdiction can set its own tax rate, and there's no race to the bottom here because if Google wants to sell ads to citizens of Mexico, it can't shift to another country and show those ads someplace else. Just tax the revenue that they collect for the revenue collect for showing ads to citizens of a given country, and make this a progressive tax so that it's a much higher tax rate on these giants that have taken over this industry, and make it a high enough tax rate so firms have an incentive to shift away from this dangerous advertising model to a healthier kind of model where I would pay a subscription, maybe $5 a month to get the search services of the internet that Google could offer me, But my deal would be I'd pay that $5 a month, but I'm not going to pay it if Google is trying to trick me and get me to click on links for, for people who paid to have those links put there. Just to give you an idea of what this is like, what this could be like, this is my suggestion about a tax rate that a firm should face. I'm sorry, you can't read the bottom axis here, but these are tens of billions of dollars, 10, 20, 30, 40 billion dollars of ad revenue per year in the United States. And I think a firm that is, say, out here getting $50 billion a year in ad revenue should be facing something like a 30% tax on its advertising revenue. Google and Facebook are the two companies that collect that much advertising revenue in the United States right now. And under this tax system, they'd pay, $15, $20 billion a year in tax. If you want to think about what that tax revenue would be for another country, take roughly the ratio of GDP in the United States to GDP in that country, total GDP, and then scale these numbers for Google and Facebook in terms of what they collect on US GDP, scale them to what to get an estimate of what they collect on advertising revenue in other countries. The revenue amounts that this kind of tax could generate could be quite substantial. And then under this progressive tax, Amazon and Microsoft in the United States, at least, would pay a little bit of tax. But beyond that, all the other firms would pay nothing. They would be below the threshold where the tax rate becomes positive. So you could still have lots of new entrants experimenting with ads if they want to, but we don't let these tech giants dominate this market. So let me try and close off my part of the session, and then we'll turn to Q&A. I think that going forward, there will be many more opportunities for cooperation between the people in a nation, but between nations. I think there will be less threat of war because nations now understand that there's little value that comes from capturing land or capturing factories. All the value in the modern economy is in people and ideas. And all nations can contribute to science and discovery, and all nations can share their ideas. Citizens in science or citizens who contribute to Wikipedia can work together, even across international boundaries, to produce something which is truly beneficial for everyone. And we need to look for more chances for that kind of cooperation. And I think the challenges facing all nations are actually very similar. It's not just the challenges facing the United States, say, versus Mexico, where I think the United States could learn from the actually very important innovation in the government regulation of the pension system in Mexico, one that leaves more of a role for the private sector to do a kind of healthy form of finance. So countries can learn from each other, but also even the United States and China, I think, are more similar than they realize. They both face threats right now from firms that could become so powerful that they overturn political stability in each nation. Right now, China is actually doing a better job of asserting some control over its largest firms, and especially limiting their ability to go into dangerous forms of financial innovation. And I think the United States and other countries in the West should learn from China's appropriate decision to limit the risks these big firms expose us to. And I think there will be many more chances for us to think about ways to cooperate, including, for example, this idea of letting each nation put its own tax on advertising to try and raise some revenue, but mainly to try and shift firms like Google and Facebook out of this very dangerous, harmful business model of targeted advertising and into the much more, safe and traditional model where you charge a fee or a subscription for a service, the kind of system that Netflix uses or many other online firms have successfully used. And just to reiterate the point from the beginning, new ideas are the key to progress. We have to have innovation if we want everyone in the future to have a chance at being better off. All of our children have a chance to be better off than we were collectively. And we need to remember there are many ways to produce and distribute and share ideas. Progress will be possible, but only if a nation has both an innovative market economy that can do its innovation, but a market economy which operates under the kind of system that, for example, the pension firms in Mexico operate under, where the government has set the frame for the market, determined the playing field, and lets the firms compete in a way that turns out to be beneficial. And that means that we need to have a government that is strong enough to say no to harmful forms of pollution, no even to forms of business models like advertising, which I think could corrupt free speech, corrupt our political systems, undermine our news businesses, and really do great harm to our societies. But all of that said, I still think there are many reasons to be optimistic, and I hope you will all, share that optimism, but help each nation work towards a government that is strong enough to say no, and then to let the market innovation take place when it offers the kinds of benefits that can be shared by everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Romer, for your lecture. And I agree, there are too many reasons to be optimistic. I believe we are living a fascinating and disruptive moment in the history of human being. And I would like to pass to the Q&A session. Not before I want to ask the audience, if you want to make questions, please feel free to send it through the chat. Estaremos muy entusiasmados de escuchar sus preguntas para poder atenderlas con mucho gusto durante la sesión de preguntas y respuestas. But just to start, Professor, how
by the way, I'm always the person who has like the innovative technology, and then sometimes it turns out to give me trouble. I'm trying to turn off my sharing so you can see me, and let me see if I can get that to work.
No problem.
Let's see. This is a new technology for me.
Not a problem. We can wait for you.
Well, let's see. Okay, that looks a little bit better. One more try.
I think we can.
Okay, if you can see me, okay,
we don't see your slides, so we can continue with the Q&A session.
Okay.
And the tech support guys will help us. Okay.
Yeah, if they can turn off the screen share from their end, that'd be great. And
they have done.
But please go ahead with your questions.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much for that. So I would like to ask you, how can technology? You talk about AI and a lot of new disruptive technology. So how can you envision technology and innovation can promote long-term growth for the benefits of people?
Yeah, I think there are just so many possibilities here. For example, one of the most important activities that we engage in as a nation or as a society is educating our children. It's also one of the most important things we do as parents or as adults. It's possible that something like machine learning and artificial intelligence could help the human parent, could help the human teacher learn better ways to customize the instruction we provide to each student. So we might find ways to do a much better job at educating young people if we used machine learning to explore all the different possibilities and enhance the ones that are working well. We can use machine learning to scan quickly for new compounds that might have important pharmaceutical benefits. There are many things that could come of the right form of innovation, but we should not assume that we'll get the most benefits if it's controlled by a particular company. In fact, in the case of oral rehydration therapy, we get enormous benefits all over the world just by publishing the idea and teaching every family how to follow this recipe without having anybody collecting a profit from this idea. So I think we need to look for more opportunities to take innovation in a direction that improves the quality of life for everyone, and especially improves the quality of life for people who right now feel like they're being left behind. One of the most unfortunate parts about for-profit innovation is that it's leading to more and more concentration of wealth in the hands of a very few people. Too many people are not getting real benefits from progress. A very few are capturing much too large a share of it. So I think if we steer in the direction of more open innovation, like Wikipedia, like open source, like science, I think we'll get the benefits innovation can offer, but we can share them more equally.
Thank you so much, Professor Romer, for that. I have another question for you. In your presentation, you mentioned that innovation was a result of forces, no, of public and private institutions. And how does this affect that knowledge also has a peculiar nature, which is a mixture of a public good and private good.
Yeah.
How does this affect competition in a market? No, and for ideas, for knowledge, for innovation. Yep. What do you think about it?
Yep. So the economics of scarce objects like land persuaded economists that private ownership is a good thing. If there's a piece of land that's being too heavily grazed because everyone is sharing it, like too many animals are on it, it's losing its capacity to regenerate the pasture. Then if you had a private owner of that pasture, the private owner would have an incentive to limit the grazing to protect the pasture today so that it's still productive tomorrow. So for scarce objects, private property and then individual decisions turned out to lead to good outcomes. One of the interesting part of this, the difference of ideas from objects, is that simple insight no longer applies. Sometimes giving a property right, like a patent right or a copyright over an idea, it has some benefits, but not always. And sometimes it's better to have it be like the oral rehydration therapy, where there's no property rights, no ownership, no control, everyone gets the benefits. The balance we're trying to achieve is to get lots of discovery, and ownership and profit can motivate discovery, but we also want lots of use, and ownership and control often limits use of ideas. So where there's no conflict of those two goals in the realm of objects, there is a conflict in the realm of ideas. And this is just a warning to us that different situations will call for different solutions. Sometimes the market, sometimes profit, sometimes property rights are good things to encourage some types of innovation, but not always. And we need to be ready to come up with other systems for innovating, subsidize the universities, subsidize the open source community, subsidize Wikipedia, develop nonprofits that can pursue certain kinds of innovation. We need to keep an open mind about what the government can do. And one of the most important forms of innovation by the government is over the arrangements that it uses to encourage innovation by many different types of entities.
Okay. I would like to elaborate, to continue elaborating on innovation. And from our standpoint as portfolio managers or pension fund managers, I think we can play a role promoting innovation, as well as the companies. So I would like to ask you what kind of actions or guidelines do you recommend for us as an investors and the companies to promote innovation as a culture?
Yeah. Well, let me mention one specific that may be a little bit narrow, but I think is worth considering. Some industries have managed to come together and to support research which will benefit all the firms in the industry. So if you have, for example, shares in all the electric companies, you don't necessarily want to have one company turn out to be the monopolist, because the gains you get at that company would be offset by losses at the other companies. What you want is all the firms in the industry to benefit. And one way that this happens is, for example, the electric companies in the United States created something called the Electric Power Research Institute, where it did research that was directly beneficial to its member firms. The cable company, companies in the United States developed something similar called Cable Labs that worked on innovation that would be beneficial to the cable firms and that the member companies all contributed to. I think governments, but also large investors could encourage these kinds of activities which use a kind of a new organization, the industry-focused research organization, which does things which are beneficial for the entire industry, and then that you as investors can receive benefits from. And that could be based on, say, contributions that are encouraged by all firms in the industry. It might even be a system where if enough firms in the industry support it, there's a small tax on all of their revenue or sales or income that is then contributed to this, this kind of entity which helps the whole industry. In the United States, we actually have organizations like that, which, for example, collect a tax on all the farmers who produce raisins. And then this raisin board will promote innovation in the use of grapes and raisins or advertising to promote the consumption of raisins. But that industry group is funded by a small tax that all producers of raisins have to pay. So I think that the pension fund investors could be an important force pushing for innovation that helps all the firms in an industry, rather than a winner-take-all contest where a single firm benefits. Now, that's not the same as asking for innovation for the whole society, but as long as we have innovation that keeps a whole industry healthy with many firms, we'd be in a much better position than we are now, where some firms are just taking over entire industries.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for that. Let me move to another topic. You have worked on a theory of growth, right, to create wealth. Can you elaborate about that theory and how improve that the governance, create more opportunities to develop social infrastructure and a better life quality for people, please?
Yep. Well, the real insight when you boil it all down of this theory is the difference between ideas and objects. And the first implication that I emphasized and others noted was the optimism that comes from the possibility of discovering more and more things that could make life better. And related to that were some insights about ways the government could encourage this, either directly by the traditional mechanisms of supporting science, but indirectly by encouraging market-based innovation. Those were in some sense, the obvious implications of understanding ideas. But the more subtle one is the fact that when we have more people around, more people on Earth, more people in other economies, it turns out that the economics of ideas tells us that that's a good thing for us. If there are many more people on the planet, that means there will be less land per person. So that sounds a little scary, but there will also be many more people who might come up with discoveries about how to get, say, more food from each square meter of land. So the fact that there are more people means more discoveries will be made if we encourage everyone to participate in those discoveries. And then if we have mechanisms like science or Wikipedia or international trade that make sure that the discoveries in one place get transmitted and used all over the world, then we actually realize benefits from the presence of other people. And I think this is really the most powerful basis for optimism as we look into the future, that instead of seeing foreigners as them in a mindset of us versus them, if they benefit, if they get something good, then we will suffer, that there's a zero-sum contest between us and them. The economics ideas really means that the whole world we can think of as us, and we can all benefit from the presence of others. And this will lead to more innovation, more progress, but I think it will even make us better people, because we won't retreat so often into this kind of angry, hostile, aggressive mode of us versus them, and we'll kind of learn to live in a more benevolent way that makes us feel better, as well as gives us more material goods. So this is the real prospect that the economics ideas holds out for us, is that there's a kind of progress that means not just we have more, but it's about progress in who we are. We can really become better people.
I totally agree that the relevance of focus on being better persons is key for the development of the humanity. Yeah. Absolutely. And I would like to ask you, I know that you have done several experiments to reduce poverty. And can you share with us some of the outcomes of that, and yep. Some thoughts? How can we take those ideas?
Yep. So when I speak, I like to be clear about when I'm conveying something which is the consensus view in economics, as opposed to when I'm conveying something which is a little bit more my personal view. The consensus view in economics, unfortunately, I think, is heading towards this sense that one way to alleviate poverty is just to give people transfers of income. So you make cash payments to people. And it's correct that if you give income to someone, that generally improves their quality of life. So there's a kind of a sense in which economics is headed in that direction. But I think this is missing something really profoundly important. I think the way to help everyone is to make sure that everyone has a job, so that instead of just giving people income, you make sure that they have a way to do a job where they contribute to society. So I think we should remind ourselves that everybody can contribute in their own way, and everybody should contribute in every nation. So instead of just giving cash transfers, I, for example, would recommend that we, for example, make subsidies for wages for low-wage workers. The returns for somebody who doesn't have very much skill when they take their first job are not very high. But if we want them to take jobs, we might offer them subsidies where the government pays half the wage of an entry-level worker, where the firm is paying a very modest amount. But then what happens is when people work on jobs, they acquire human capital, just as they learn human capital in school. So they start out in a job where they aren't that productive, but they acquire more skill, and over their lifetimes, they become much more productive. So I would like to work towards a future where everyone does something that gives meaning and purpose to their lives, and which lets them contribute to the well-being of society as a whole, and which gives dignity to that kind of work on the part of everyone. And then we have to be a little bit careful about defining what we mean by a job. There may be a kind of volunteer effort that we recognize as a job, like contributing to open source or Wikipedia. So we need to kind of think about how to recognize that, and raising children is a job. That may be something we want to reward women for, if that's what a woman decides to do. So there'll be some details to work out, but my message is think about encouraging work and jobs and the purpose and meaning that comes from using that as the organizing principle in a life, and avoid this idea of just giving people transfers. Because unfortunately, giving people transfers is a little bit of a way to give up on them, to just say, oh, they'll never produce anything. Let's just, put them out to pasture and give them some money to live on, but forget about them as contributing to society. That's a very elitist and very ugly kind of mindset. And we really need to keep reminding ourselves that everybody can contribute something. We need to encourage everybody to contribute something and to become better, more skilled, more responsive to others, more social as a result of those contributions that they make. So I'm not sure I've persuaded all economists to think this way, think about wage subsidies instead of transfers, but I'm hoping we'll get there.
Well, pretty interesting, your point of view and approach to solve poverty. Thank you so much for that, to share with us your thoughts. I think we have room for one last question. And I would, if you can elaborate about what are the macro tendencies for the future that you see and how to take advantage of them?
Yeah. So the governments have learned a lot about how to help an economy escape from a recession and keep it from turning into a depression like we saw during the 1930s in the United States. One of the most important and powerful ways to do that is through the mechanism of the central bank. And central banks are examples of government organizations that have gotten stronger over time and have learned to say no sometimes when something is going wrong in an economy. But one of the problems of relying on central banks that mainly cut interest rates to help us recover from a recession is that many of the benefits from interest rate cuts go to people who are the most wealthy. So we've got a form of reliance on monetary policy for recovery from recessions that tends to bias things in favor of the wealthy and also leaves us exposed to the risk of these kind of asset bubbles and financial instability. So I think one of the most important forms of government intervention and innovation right now is to come up with systems of counter-cyclical stimulus, ways to help an economy recover that don't rely just on low interest rates, but rely on more direct intervention. And you won't be surprised to learn that I think the kind of direct intervention that could be helpful is much more aggressive subsidies for people to get back to work during a recession. So I think this could help us avoid this kind of counter-cyclical policy that creates asset bubbles, and also this tendency to favor the financial system rather than to favor workers. So we need subsidies to work that can operate counter-cyclically and help us recover quickly from a situation where many people are out of work.
Well, thank you so much. It has been an honor talking to you, Professor Romer, on behalf of Amafore and all the audience that has followed this digital encounter. Thank you so much for being with us, and hopefully next time we can meet you in person in Mexico. Will be lovely to have you here.
I'd love to do that. Let's hope the world can get control of this pandemic, and it'll be wonderful to meet again in person.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.